So it turns out that when the Trump campaign said they had no idea what Project 2025 was and had absolutely no plans to implement the wildly unpopular plan, they were lying. I mean, you obviously knew that. It was pretty obvious that since the people that wrote Project 2025 were mostly former Trump administration people, and many of those same people were slated to return to government if Trump was reelected, I mean, you'd have to be a credulous idiot to think that they wouldn't implement Project 2025. But it turns out that the legacy media is full of credulous idiots, and it's been Project 2025 all the way down since Trump came back to the Oval Office. Now look, I would never tell you that we told you so, so Liz Dye is gonna tell you how hard we told you so.
Thanks, Devin. Last summer, we made a whole video on Project 2025. It seemed to us like something America definitely should not do. But then, Donald Trump has been president now for 3 months, and he is well on his way to implementing the Project 2025 agenda, which is weird because on the campaign trail, he said he had nothing to do with it.
I have nothing to do with Project 2025. That's out there. I haven't read it. I don't want to read it purposely. I'm not going to read it.
Project 2025? Never heard of it. Then, Trump sent a whole passel of surrogates over to Politico to pinky swear that everyone from Project 2025 was barred from a future Trump administration. Supposedly, Don Jr. was leading the effort to assemble names of banned staffers. In October, Finance CEO Howard Lutnick, who was leading Trump's transition team, told the New York Post that no one associated with Project 2025 would have a job in the future Trump administration, as in none, zero, radioactive, so that's a clear position. Today, the Trump administration is full of people associated with Project 2025, and Lutnick is Secretary of Commerce. Also, the administration is going pedal to the metal to implement Project 2025's policy goals. So let's check back in and see how much of what we predicted has come to pass and what we can expect going forward. These guys really, really hate immigrants and pronouns, and they love local control. Well, unless the locality wants to let women control their own bodies or treat undocumented immigrants like human beings or be nice to gay and trans kids. Also, they're really mad about porn. Well, hide me from July. Checks out. The most important piece of Project 2025 by far was the plan for the president to seize spending power from Congress, sometimes called impoundment. The Constitution says very clearly that Congress shall have the power to provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States, and no money shall be drawn from the Treasury but in consequence of appropriations made by law. Another word for appropriations is the budget, which Congress passes for the president to sign, and the federal agencies spend the money as allocated.
I'm just a bill. Yes, I'm only a bill.
Other presidents have refused to spend money allocated by Congress, and the Supreme Court said, no, that's not how any of this goes. In 1975, the Supreme Court told Richard Nixon that he absolutely had to spend money allocated by Congress under the Federal Water Pollution Control Act, even if he super-duper didn't want to, which he didn't. In 1998, the court invalidated the Line Item Veto Act, which would have allowed President Clinton to cross out parts of the budget that he didn't like. But the mastermind of Project 2025 is a guy named Russ Vought, and his big idea is that maybe SCOTUS was kidding. Maybe the Constitution says that the president really can refuse to spend money allocated by Congress, and so Trump should put political appointees in charge of the Office of Management and Budget instead of neutral bean counters so they can direct the amount, duration, and purpose of any apportioned funding to ensure against waste, fraud, and abuse, and ensure consistency with the president's agenda and applicable laws. That last part about consistency with the president's agenda is the key. See, Vought wants the people holding the federal checkbook to be aggressive in wielding the tool on behalf of the president's agenda and willing to defend the power against attacks from Congress. And that's exactly what happened. Russ Vought got put in charge of the Office of Management and Budget, and from the day he was inaugurated, Trump said he's just not going to spend money in the federal budget. And that is the necessary precondition for enacting the entire Project 2025 agenda. First, they defund social programs across the board, which sounds like crazy hyperbole, but these are people who refer to humanitarian aid as an immiserating feature of the global landscape. They want to turn management of Social Security over to private companies, and they want to abolish Head Start, the program which provides early childhood education for hundreds of thousands of poor kids. And two, once the president has seized control of the federal budget, the Project 2025 guys want him to use those tax dollars that you and I and everyone else has paid to enact social policy without having to pass laws. So the president can say no education funds for states that allow trans kids to play soccer on their school teams, or he can tell universities that they'll lose all federal subsidies if they let students exercise their First Amendment right to protest, or he can threaten to penalize law firms that represent clients he doesn't like. And hey, guess what? He already has. Yeah, those are things that Trump has done since taking office, and it's all thanks to Project 2025, which told him that the key to everything else was impoundment. Okay, so that's the how. Now for the what, because Project 2025 had a whole lot of government cuts on its wish list. First off, let's talk about the State Department. According to the Project 2025 manifesto, upon inauguration, the Secretary of State should order an immediate freeze on allocation of resources, foreign assistance disbursements, domestic and international contracts and payments, hiring and recruiting decisions, etc., pending a political appointee-driven review to ensure that such efforts comport with the new administration's policies. And so, on his first day in office, Trump signed an executive order instituting a 90-day pause in United States foreign development assistance, pending reviews of such programs for programmatic efficiency and consistency with United States foreign policy. And he said that the Office of Management and Budget shall enforce this pause through its apportionment authority, i.e., the federal checkbook. That is all Project 2025, and it's exactly what happened. The State Department paused all foreign aid. Then the administration set about shutting down whole agencies established by Congress and funded under the federal budget, which is, say it with us now, a law. Most notably, the government shuttered USAID, the largest humanitarian aid agency in the world. Elon Musk called USAID a giant money laundering operation and bragged on Twitter that he spent the weekend feeding the agency to the wood chipper, even though he had to miss some fun parties. He also stood in the Oval Office and claimed that the agency spent $50 million on condoms for Gaza and promised that funding for Ebola prevention had not been cut.
One of the things we accidentally canceled very briefly was Ebola prevention.
So weird that Musk is doing pressers in the Oval Office and leading cabinet meetings, because the Justice Department told about 5 different federal judges that Musk is just a lowly advisor with zero actual authority. Anyway, the claims about condoms and Ebola were both false. The agency wasn't spending any money on condoms for Gaza, but it was spending money to contain an Ebola outbreak in Uganda, and now it's not. It's not spending money to contain HIV and AIDS. It's not vaccinating kids for polio. It's not spending $290 million to prevent severe acute malnutrition, which will result in 369,000 extra child deaths a year, because the Project 2025 guys think spending a nickel a serving on peanut butter and powdered milk to feed a starving child is bad value for American taxpayers. Secretary of State Marco Rubio canceled 83% of USAID contracts and fired all but a handful of its 10,000-person staff. He ordered the few remaining programs to be administered through the State Department, which is, again, not what Congress legislated when it created the agency, but Elon Musk liked it, so I guess it's okay. And while we're on the subject of the State Department, the Project 2025 wish list included defunding or terminating membership in the United Nations Human Rights Council, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, better known as UNESCO, and the United Nations Relief and Works Agency. Check, check, and check. Other congressionally created foreign aid agencies Trump purported to shut down include the U.S. Institute for Peace, the Inter-American Foundation, and the U.S. African Development Foundation because, thanks to Project 2025, the president can just decide not to spend money in the federal budget. Did we mention that Project 2025 is obsessed with pronouns? Project 2025 contains more than 100 mentions of gender identity, gender ideology, transgender identity, gender equity, and pronouns. Basically, they want to turn the clock back several decades to a time when gay people were treated like deviants and perverts, and we all pretended that trans people did not exist. Or the, quote, unscientific notion that men can become women and vice versa. They also aim to do away with government efforts to increase women's participation in the workforce. As a start, they propose to delete the terms sexual orientation and gender identity, diversity, equity and inclusion, DEI, gender, gender equality, gender equity, gender awareness, gender sensitive, abortion, reproductive health care, reproductive rights, and any other term used to deprive Americans of their First Amendment rights from every federal rule, agency regulation, contract, grant regulation, and piece of legislation that exists. And that's exactly what happened. On his first day in office, Trump signed an executive order defending women from gender ideology and extremism and restoring biological truth to the federal government. He said the erasure of sex in language and policy has a corrosive impact not just on women, but on the validity of the entire American system. And then he mandated the erasure of sex in language and policy, ordering federal agencies to remove all statements, policies, regulations, forms, communications, or other internal and external messages that promote or otherwise inculcate gender ideology. For the past 3 months, federal agencies have furiously scrubbed language relating to gender from their websites and federal regulations. They banned the pride flag and ordered government employees to remove pronouns from their email signature lines and online bios. They banned the non-binary gender marker on passports and ceased processing change of gender requests for trans Americans. The purge was so complete that the Centers for Disease Control deleted guidance that clinical trials should include both male and female test subjects, which is more than a little ironic, considering that the administration is so adamant that men and women are obviously biologically different. Project 2025 called to restore standards of lethality and excellence to the military by kicking out all trans service members. And just a week into his second term, Trump issued an executive order doing just that. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth ordered the military to cut all trans service members off from gender-affirming care and prepare to kick them out, and was only stopped by trial courts issuing restraining orders. Project 2025 is deeply hostile to trans people, going so far as to characterize any discussion of transgender issues as pornographic. It says pornography, manifested today in the omnipresent propagation of transgender ideology and sexualization of children, has no claim to First Amendment protection. The people who produce and distribute it should be imprisoned. Educators and public librarians who purvey it should be classified as registered sex offenders, and telecommunications and technology firms that facilitate its spread should be shuttered. Fun fact, pornography is First Amendment protected speech. But that has not stopped the administration from attacking trans people every way they can. Trump ordered the transfer of trans women prisoners to men's prisons and withdrew their health care. He threatened the funding of any medical institution that provides gender-affirming care to minors, something he refers to as chemical and surgical mutilation. He purported to end federal funding for school systems that indoctrinate children with gender ideology, just like Project 2025 told him to do. And that's not the only red meat he's thrown to the Project 2025 culture warriors.
Sorry to interrupt, Liz, but if you're signing a bunch of dubious executive orders, you're probably going to want a good lawyer. But if you want a great lawyer, my law firm, the Eagle Team, can help. If you've ever gotten in a car crash, suffered a data breach, especially if you got one of those data breach letters saying your information might have been leaked, or dealing with a workers' comp or social security issue, we can represent you or help find you the right attorney. And by the way, we don't get paid unless you do, so there's nothing up front. So just click on the link in the description or call the phone number that's on screen right now for a free consultation with my team. Because you don't just need a legal team, you need the Eagle Team.
Project 2025 is broadly critical of programs that support diversity, equity, and inclusion, better known as DEI. I guess they prefer homogeneity, inequity, and exclusion. Yay, beige! And the Trump administration has delivered on that one bigly. In a day one executive order, the president defined DEI programs as illegal and immoral discrimination. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, or EEOC, immediately pivoted to addressing the problem of discriminatory DEI, and every federal agency dutifully canceled all diversity programs and scrubbed references to DEI from their websites. They also purged all employees who'd ever run or even voluntarily attended those programs, because you can't be too careful. So Project 2025 demanded that the military eliminate Marxist indoctrination and divisive critical race theory programs. And then Trump signed an executive order restoring America's fighting force by abolishing the DEI bureaucracy. First, he fired a bunch of high-ranking non-white and non-male officials just to show he meant business. Then the military removed subversive books from its libraries. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth canceled official recognition of Martin Luther King Day, Juneteenth, Black History Month, Pride Month, Women's History Month, Hispanic Heritage Month, Disability Awareness Month, and Holocaust Remembrance Day, because all of those are DEI. Exhibits on the Navajo code talkers and trans service members and female Jewish graduates of the naval academies were all purged from various military museums, but they put the names of Confederate slave owners back on those bases, because that's not DEI, it's history. But the president wasn't content to root out DEI from the government. He also ordered federal agencies to sever contracts and grants to any private company that supports diversity in hiring. And that's straight out of Project 2025, which called for the Office of Management and Budget to use federal dollars to drive policy, including by obtaining transparency about entities that are awarded federal contracts and grants, and by using government contracts to push back against woke policies in corporate America. Is it the job of the federal government to dictate corporate policy? Because that kind of seems like a First Amendment issue, right? If corporate DEI policies are legal, and no court has said that they're not, then what business is it of the government's how private businesses choose to conduct themselves? I mean, when it was the Biden administration suggesting that private businesses could not discriminate against trans employees, conservatives sued to block that as an unlawful interference in private commerce. And by the way, check out the plaintiffs in this case. Yep, that's Texas and the Heritage Foundation, the same organization that published Project 2025. But Heritage wasn't bothered by that contradiction, and neither was Trump. Project 2025 called for the Civil Rights Division to spend its first year under the next administration using the full force and federal prosecutorial resources to investigate and prosecute all state and local governments, institutions of higher education, corporations, and any other private employers who are engaged in discrimination in violation of constitutional and legal requirements. On January 21, Trump signed an executive order instructing agency heads to identify up to 9 potential civil compliance investigations of publicly traded corporations, large nonprofit corporations or associations, foundations with assets of $500 million or more, state and local bar and medical associations, and institutions of higher education with endowments over $1 billion. Attorney General Pam Bondi is now working up a hit list of private businesses, universities, and charities to face federal prosecution for exceeding the wokeness limit. Hey, remember when Project 2025 got all mad because the left is threatening the tax-exempt status of churches and charities that reject woke progressivism?
Pepperidge Farm remembers.
Project 2025 called to drastically reduce the federal workforce, although even they didn't envision Elon Musk slashing and burning through the federal government. They did, however, envision an end to civil service protections and a wholesale attack on unions representing government employees. During the first Trump administration, the president tried to create a new class of employees under something he called Schedule F. That group would include tens of thousands of career civil servants who had previously been protected from being fired every 4 years when the administration changed, to ensure that the federal government would have competent, experienced staff providing stability year in and year out. But non-political appointees who can't be fired except for cause tend to get a little twitchy when you ask them to, say, steal $81 million from the state of New York, just as an example. Under Schedule F, Trump tried to reclassify most federal employees as political appointees who could be fired without cause at the whim of the president. President Biden rescinded that order, but Project 2025 called for Trump to bring it back, and now he has, repealing Biden's repeal and reinstating his old order within hours of being sworn in. Project 2025 also called for the abolition of federal employee unions, and on March 27, Trump published an executive order purporting to cancel collective bargaining agreements that negatively affect agencies which handle national security issues, except that in his telling, that included virtually every agency in the federal government. So if this order is allowed to stand, and it's already been challenged in court, it will essentially outlaw all federal unions. Project 2025 had lots of thoughts about the environment, and weirdly, none of them were about how to protect the Earth and ensure that it doesn't turn into a boiling sea of lava. Instead, the manifesto railed against the climate change alarm industry, which is harmful to future U.S. prosperity. Luckily, Donald Trump hates windmills and he loves clean coal power plants. So Project 2025 called to repeal fuel economy standards, which Secretary Sean Duffy ordered the Transportation Department to do within hours of being sworn in. It called electric vehicles a national security risk, and the Trump administration is currently withdrawing rules designed to boost the production and adoption of electric vehicles, except Tesla. They like those for some reason. Project 2025 called to repeal anti-smog regulations, which EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin did, claiming that the rules impose significant costs on power plants. Project 2025 called for us to withdraw from the Paris Climate Agreement, which we did in another Day One order. Basically, Project 2025 demanded that every mention of climate change, climate justice, global warming, and the environment be removed from federal regulations, and they've either gotten their way or they will get it in short order. And if that means we have to take out the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and the National Weather Service, they are fine with it. ¿Lloverá mañana? No sé. Now let's talk about tariffs, which have recently become great again. On this one, Project 2025 took a middle-of-the-road approach. They got a normie Republican economist named Kent Lastman, who heads the Competitive Enterprise Institute, to write a section on traditional free market approaches to tariffs. TLDR, they think they're bad. And then Project 2025 got Trump's former trade advisor, Peter Navarro, to write the MAGA position on tariffs, which is that they are great. Take a wild guess which one of those guys ended up in the White House. Navarro is obsessed with trade deficits because apparently he thinks it's no fair if the grocery store sells you oatmeal and apples and toilet paper, but never buys anything from you. So now we have reciprocal tariffs on every other country for grocery.
Likewise, an old-fashioned term that we use, groceries. I used it in the campaign. It's such an old-fashioned term, but a beautiful term, groceries. It sort of says a bag with different things in it. Groceries went through the roof.
Feel that liberation. But okay, when we made our video in July, we talked a lot about culture war issues, abortion, birth control, porn. Again, if you have a period tracker on your phone, if you don't want people to invoke the Handmaid's Tale when they're talking about your program, maybe don't use the words abortion surveillance and complain that the government isn't tracking abortions closely enough, and put in writing that you plan to force doctors to ask women why they're choosing to have an abortion, and then report the answer to the federal government. So if you have a period tracker on your phone, no, you don't. But has the government actually outlawed birth control and abortion yet? Well, mostly no. They reinstated the Protecting Life and Global Health Assistance policy, better known as the Mexico City policy, denying foreign aid to any agency that mentions the word abortion. That one was on the Project 2025 wish list. On the other hand, they canceled more or less all foreign aid across the board, so the Department of Health and Human Services announced in April that it's withholding tens of millions of dollars in federal funding from clinics affiliated with Planned Parenthood. Title X is a federal grant program established by Congress in 1970 to ensure access to reproductive and healthcare services for people with low incomes. It provides contraceptives, breast and cervical cancer screenings, and pregnancy and STI testing. None of the clinics receiving these funds provides abortions, but HHS told them that their funding was being temporarily withheld due to possible violations of federal civil rights law. Apparently, the Trump administration is mad that they provide pap smears and breast exams to undocumented immigrants. Also, the clinic's mission statement includes a commitment to Black communities, which the administration says paints a picture of Planned Parenthood that suggests it is engaged across its affiliates in widespread practices that unavoidably employ race in a negative manner. Does it now? Really? Right now, Health and Human Services has not made any major moves to limit access to contraception, likely because Elon Musk and the Doge Bros are in the process of firing most of the staff. So far, Robert Kennedy has prioritized lining up this guy to investigate the non-existent link between vaccines and autism. Geyer's license to practice medicine was suspended in 2011 because he was treating autistic children with a drug considered dangerous for young people and not known to alleviate symptoms. Once the smoke clears and the lawsuits shake out, though, we may well see the government restrict access to the morning after pill and other forms of contraception in favor of the unsurpassed effectiveness of the rhythm method, which again is not better than actual birth control. Fertility awareness-based methods involve tracking your menstrual cycle and abstaining from sex during ovulation when you're most likely to become pregnant. The rhythm method involves tracking your menstrual cycle and abstaining from sex during ovulation when you're most likely to become pregnant. Neither one of these provides any protection from sexually transmitted infections, and both have a roughly 20% failure rate over a year. Or as they used to say back in the day, you know what they call people who use the rhythm method? Parents. But remember how we started today's video talking about impoundment? That's where the executive branch refuses to spend money allocated by Congress? Project 2025's big idea is for the president to wrestle control of the federal budget away from Congress. Under this plan, Congress could do its job and pass a federal spending bill, and the president could simply refuse to spend the money, or he could spend some of the money but deny it to states that refuse to enact his preferred policy. And yeah, that's an end run around Congress, but it's also an end run around the Constitution because the 10th Amendment says powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. That means if Congress hasn't passed a law, the individual states get to run things their own way. It definitely does not mean that the president gets to use federal tax dollars to force the states to do stuff. But that has always always been phase 2 of the Project 2025 plan after getting the courts to greenlight Trump's theft of Congress's power. Right now, Trump is using tax dollars to bully private institutions like Columbia University, which is desperately contorting itself in an attempt to ensure that all its federal funding doesn't get yanked. Project 2025's plan is to take this bullying campaign nationwide. And what's going on right now in the state of Maine provides a sneak preview. On February 21st, the state governor showed up at the White House for a lunch at which the president ordered them to comply with his ban on trans girls participating in sports. He singled out the governor of Maine, Janet Mills, and demanded that she comply. It's a bit hard to hear from this clip, but she said she would comply with Maine state law, which protects trans athletes.
The NCAA has complied immediately, by the way. That's good. But I understand Maine. Is Maine here, the governor of Maine? Well, are you not going to comply with it?
I'm complying with state and federal laws.
We are the federal law. Well, you better do it. You better do it because you're not going to get any federal funding at all if you don't.
You heard the president threaten to yank all federal funding from Maine? That's Project 2025, using federal funds to punish states for refusing to act the president's preferred social policy. So first, Leland Dudick, the acting commissioner of the Social Security Administration, decided he would teach Governor Mills a lesson. On February 27th, he emailed staff about contracts the SSA had with Maine that he could cancel. He was told that he could cancel the enumeration at birth and electronic death registration programs, which make it easier to record births and deaths. One allows parents to register for a Social Security number at a hospital when their baby's born, and the other allows funeral homes to tell the government that someone has died, so among other things, the government stops sending out Social Security checks. Dudick was warned that terminating the contracts would result in improper payments and potential for identity theft, in addition to imposing burdens on new parents and grieving families. And he said, please cancel these contracts. While our improper payments will go up and fraudsters may compromise identities, no money will go from the public trust to a petulant child, by which he meant Governor Mills. That did not go over well with the people of Maine, and after a massive public outcry, Dudick admitted to the New York Times, I was ticked at the governor of Maine for not being real cordial to the president. I'll admit I screwed up. You think? The policy was rescinded, and Dudick put out a press release congratulating himself for his remarkable personal growth. But that wasn't the end of the troubles for Maine. The day after Trump yelled at Mills over lunch, the Department of Education and the Department of Health and Human Services launched investigations into supposedly discriminatory policies in Maine public schools. Instead of taking months of interviews, both concluded in a matter of days that the state was violating Title VI and Title IX of the Civil Rights Act. Also the next day, the Department of Agriculture announced that it was withholding tens of millions of dollars in funds to the University of Maine because the school discriminates against women. To be clear, no court in the land has said that allowing trans girls to participate in sports violates the law. Not a single one. Trump himself said it in an executive order, but that's not the law, unlike the Maine Human Rights Act, which is a law, and it bans discrimination on the basis of gender identity. A week later, the Department of Commerce canceled funding for a Sea Grant at the University of Maine. The Sea Grant program is similar to land grant programs at U.S. universities, but for marine aquaculture, not agriculture. There are 34 such programs around the country, and only one got terminated a week after Governor Mills had that kerfuffle at the White House, which seems like it's not a coincidence. The Washington Post reports that most of the cuts were restored after Maine's Republican Senator Susan Collins intervened. But states only getting federal funds if they surrender their sovereignty is exactly what's contemplated by Project 2025, and that suits Trump too. Just for clarity, there are 0 trans athletes participating in varsity programs at the University of Maine. The only thing that might head this nonsense off is a ruling by the Supreme Court that the president can't just steal Congress's power over the budget. That would certainly be consistent with 100 years of legal precedent, and every trial judge that's looked at it so far has agreed the president can't simply refuse to spend money allocated by Congress. But with this Supreme Court, you never know.
Thanks, Liz. Now, if you'd like to go into more detail about all the things that Project 2025 recommended and what has been accomplished already, we were using a website called project2025.observer that lists the 300 or so things that were contained within Project 2025. And as of the date of the recording of this video, the Trump administration has completed about 100 of the things that were contained in Project 2025, and they are in process of completing 60 or so more. So basically, they're about halfway done with everything that was contained within Project 2025. Now, if you're worried about the implementation of Project 2025, aka the U.S. Handmaid's Tale, now might be a good time to limit your online footprint. And if you're worried about your privacy online, there are people who can help. And that's why we recommend signing up for today's sponsor, Incogni. You can use my link in the description of the code LegalEagle for an exclusive 60% off discount. Because Incogni removes your personal data from online data brokers by reaching out directly and forcing them to take your personal info down. If these data brokers resist, Incogni will take care of that too, because Incogni fights back. Incogni also just launched a new feature called Custom Removals for subscribers to their unlimited plan that I think is really cool. It allows you to flag an unlimited number of sites where your data is exposed, and you can even have Incogni's privacy experts review and tackle the most uncooperative data brokers in people's search sites. Because these data brokers are the reason why in the US you can search your name and find a bunch of websites that will give anyone your home address, phone number, and extensive history. It's shocking just how easy it is to find all this information. It also might be why you're getting so many spam calls lately, or even how someone might steal your identity. But Incogni is a great way to take back control of your data, increase your online privacy, and cut down on those annoying scam calls and emails that used to flood my voicemail and inbox. Now, I've been using Incogni for years, and in that time you can see I've been on hundreds of lists, some of which had a high sensitivity score, meaning the broker had tons of data on me. Luckily, Incogni has completed hundreds of takedowns for me over the years and is processing dozens of others. If I were to do this myself, it would take weeks. So thank you, Incogni, for saving me hundreds of hours and adding me to over 40 suppression lists. And Incogni will continue to conduct ongoing removals because even if a data broker removes your data once, they can always collect it again. Incogni makes sure that your personal information stays off the market for good. So if online privacy is important to you, give Incogni a try. If you click on the link that's on screen or down below, you can try Incogni risk-free for 30 days and get a full refund if you're not into it. And if you keep it, you'll still get the exclusive 60% off discount so long as you use my link or the code LegalEagle, all one word, at checkout. So after you sign up for Incogni, click over here for more LegalEagle, or I'll see you in court.